Major League Baseball has just announced the Roberto Clemente Award winner for 2024. We're going to talk briefly about that, but then we're going to go into the plane crash that took the life of incredible superstar Roberto Clemente on this Taking Off podcast. Hello and welcome to the Taking Off podcast. I'm Dan Milliken, and today we're going to reach into the archives and talk about the Roberto Clemente crash. Just recently, Major League Baseball has announced the 2024 recipient of the Roberto Clemente Award. It's Salvador Perez from the Kansas City Royals. Here's a quick clip from Major League Baseball.
This is baseball's most prestigious award. It's a great award because it puts focus on the community involvement and philanthropic efforts that our players undertake throughout the year. It's also important because it carries on the legacy of the great Roberto Clemente. This year, we have the first Kansas City Royal ever. The press release is out there already, no drama, but Salvador Perez, a well-deserving winner. The good works that this man does are really unbelievable. In his home in Venezuela, he does everything from providing food and medical care, providing a baseball field for baseball and softball, and all the equipment in the league so that the kids have the equipment to play with. Here in the United States, he's been active in the fight against ALS and other health causes. He supported Teach for America program in Kansas City. He gave $1 million to the Royals Youth Academy, which is one of our very, very best, thanks in part to your generosity. And, he even stopped this year on a way to a game in order to play a little wiffle ball and promote baseball development.
Promoted wiffle ball, huh?
The Roberto Clemente Award is a very, very prestigious award, one that the Major League Baseball players really cherish. As a matter of fact, here's Salvi on how important this award is.
And I tell you that after winning a World Series, that's the second best award I have. And I know I got some Gold Glove, Silver Slugger, World Series MVP, but that means a lot to me.
All right, we're about to get into what took the life of Roberto Clemente, the plane crash that happened. Before that, I want to tell you a little bit about Clemente. Clemente first played in the major leagues in 1955. He played for 18 seasons. He was a perennial all-star. He was the National League MVP. This guy wasn't just good. He was great. And the press, Roberto was one of the first Puerto Rican Latino players in Major League Baseball, 1955. And he was very conscious of his accent, his heavy accent, and was very shy when it came to the press. And the press took advantage of it, and they made fun of his accent. And when he mispronounced or pronounced words with a heavy accent, they would phonetically spell that out in their stories to try to make Clemente look silly. And, this hurt Clemente, but this guy was down to the core one of the good guys. And when the cameras weren't rolling and when the press wasn't there, this guy was doing good. He was helping the communities. He was reaching out. And there was a horrible earthquake in Central America in 1972 toward the end of the year. And he organized relief and got a bunch of supplies in his home country, Puerto Rico, home state. I don't know how you say that. But he was in Puerto Rico, and he chartered a plane to take a bunch of relief supplies. And he had that plane go. But when the plane went and delivered the relief supplies to the earthquake-stricken Central American country, the supplies didn't reach the people that needed it most. And he was super concerned about that. So on the next one, he decided he would go himself to oversee and make sure that the supplies reached. And on December 31st, 1972, he chartered the plane and it crashed on takeoff. And so, reaching into our archives, here is our report on exactly why the plane crashed and took the life of Major League Baseball great Roberto Clemente.
A 4-engine DC-7 overloaded with relief supplies crashed shortly after takeoff, killing all aboard, including Major League Baseball star Roberto Clemente. We're going to take a look on this accident investigation episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and we're going to look at the tragic crash of a DC-7 on New Year's Eve, 1972 out of Puerto Rico, and find out how and why it happened and what we can take away to make us better pilots and better people. Clemente was a star player for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and in his last game of the season, he had his 3,000th hit. He'd gone to Nicaragua after the season to do some coaching and was at home in Puerto Rico in December when a horrible earthquake hit Nicaragua. Clemente was a key person in getting relief supplies over to the stricken nation, but then he got word that the government was taking his supplies and selling them. Well, Clemente didn't give up. He chartered a plane to take more supplies and decided to go along to make sure the supplies reached the victims. An aircraft operator out of Puerto Rico owned by Arthur Rivera approached Clemente offering the services of his DC-7, and they agreed on a price of about $4,000 upon the return. More about Rivera and his operation shortly. Rivera hired a pilot but couldn't get a co-pilot or flight engineer, which was required for this type of aircraft. So he himself took the co-pilot position. In effect, the pilot was flying this 4-engine plane pretty much by himself. Immediately after takeoff from Isla Verde International Airport, the plane crashed 1.5 miles into the ocean, killing everyone aboard. And before we get into the accident analysis, let's find out a little bit more about who Roberto Clemente was and why he did what he did. He was one of the first wave Latino players in Major League Baseball and was a hero and role model for many Latino fans. To get a better picture, I reached out to Ruperto Prado of the Rupert MLB channel to fill in some of the backstory.
It was thanks to him that we have so many amazing Hall of Famers now that are Latinos that represent Hispanic communities all over the world. And by far his greatest legacy was what great of a person he was. While he was not perfect, he was great with kids. He was great with his community. He always wanted to help those that needed the help the most, and the people where he came from who he knew needed more opportunities. He loved signing balls for kids. He loved doing stuff for kids. He loved helping those in need, anything he could do. And his death is a great example of that. He was a great ball player, with his greatest strength probably being that amazing arm at right field, throwing runners out like nobody. He was not the fastest, he was not the strongest, but he gave it all. And one example of that is how many extra bases he was able to get. Like almost over 50% of the time he would try to get that extra base and he got it. He was always out there hustling and playing for his best because he knew he was born to play this game. He said himself he thinks God put him here to play this sport. And like Dan said, he finished his career with 3,000 hits. Not an easy feat. You know what's funny about that is that Roberto Clemente got a lot of bashing for the way he talked. Because of course he was Hispanic. He was raised speaking Spanish, just like me. And in the transition of trying to speak English, he would say some funny words like heat instead of hit. And the media would put H-E-E-T in the newspaper. And he felt like it was making fun of him, his language, how he spoke. And I can relate to that because I say stuff like that all the time. I still have a language barrier, and I've been living here most of my life. I'm proud of the weird words that come out of my mouth because there's an accent there. There will always be an accent there, and I'm proud to be Latino. And Roberto Clemente was one of the people that opened the doors for us.
Thanks, Rupert. Riviera's company was called American Air Express Leasing Company, and he was struggling to make ends meet, living off each deal he could make. The plane was a McDonnell Douglas DC-7. This is a 4-engine transport aircraft that was built for only 5 years, 1953 through 58. It was the last piston engine transport made by Douglas. And one interesting note, there are no examples of this plane in service today, unlike just about every other Douglas creation. 18 cylinders with 3,400 horsepower on each engine. In 1959, Douglas began converting the DC-7s into freight haulers. Airframes were fitted with large cargo doors and most cabin windows were removed. The max takeoff weight was 143,000 pounds. The company had just gotten the plane to Puerto Rico a month before and had a taxi problem where it went off the taxiway into a concrete drainage ditch, damaging the spinning props, reportedly to the two engines closest to the fuselage, the inboard engines on each side. Now, anyone that has watched this channel knows that I recently had a prop strike on a taxi. Well, I hit mud and I knew to tear down the engine. This was worse. They hit concrete. Clearly a sudden stoppage. Even in 1972, standard procedure was a teardown and examination of the engines affected. Well, an FAA maintenance inspector looked at the propeller shafts and found them within tolerances. Basically, having seen this on my own plane, what you look for is any movement on the propeller plate. It's perpendicular to the crankshaft, and if there's damage to the shaft, it'll show up in a procedure called dialing the crankshaft, as the needle mounted on the flange will show any discrepancy as the crankshaft is turned. And that was cleared by the FAA investigator. Rivera, struggling to keep his company afloat, simply changed out the props. And 29 days later, on Clemente's flight, the plane was flown for the first time after that prop sudden stoppage. Rivera was having problems finding qualified pilots. And by happenstance, a few days earlier, pilot Jerry Hill had watched the plane being loaded, and after another pilot failed to show up, Hill, now in Miami, was hired by Rivera to fly back for this flight. And by all accounts, Hill was a seasoned and experienced pilot. Though one article referred to a checkered past, I couldn't find anything else to corroborate that. So if you know of something, leave a comment below. He had over 12,000 flight hours over his 30-year career, including 3,000 in the DC-7. And he was unaware of the prop strike the previous month. But he had to have had known there was some issues. At 5 p.m. on the evening of the flight, the plane taxied over to the service ramp for work on the engines, which apparently weren't running correctly. 3.5 hours later, the plane taxied back to the ramp to pick up Clemente. Now, maybe that's when Jerry Hill boarded as well, which would mean he didn't possibly know about the engines. Then to round out the crew, Rivera himself took the co-pilot seat, although he was only rated for the DC-3. You don't have to have a rating to be in the right seat, but, there was that. He put a mechanic in the flight engineer seat, and Hill was the only qualified DC-7 pilot on the flight deck. The plane had been loaded, and Clemente and associate Angel Lozano boarded with the flight crew. Total of 5 people. It was after 9 p.m. on a moonless night. The NTSB determined that the plane was about 4,000 pounds overweight. This is from their own calculations. The submitted flight plan had the cargo well under the maximum, but the NTSB found documents indicating that extra fuel for the return trip had been purchased and put on board because the crew knew it would be unlikely they'd be able to refuel in the stricken Nicaragua. Overweight by 4,000 pounds. It sounds like a lot, but actually it was 3%. Based on my research, this is not the smoking gun. And it was loaded by a very qualified loadmaster, so balance was most likely in the green. And the NTSB agrees. They found that while the weight was a factor, it was not the cause. The plane, by eyewitness reports, took an exceptionally long takeoff roll and gained very little altitude. At 2 minutes and 45 seconds into the flight, the plane had turned left, and the pilot told the tower coming back around. One critical note here as well. The plane was probably over maximum landing weight. Now, a pilot in emergency lands anyway. But did Hill try to dump fuel? We'll get to that in a minute. The problem there is that it would have taken 20 or 30 minutes to complete an entire fuel dump out of the DC-7. At 3 minutes into the flight, the plane experienced a catastrophic failure of engine number 2. It's possible engine number 3 was lost as well. Both 2 and 3 are the closest to the fuselage and also contain the hydraulic pumps. With loss of hydraulics and possibly loss of electrical, the pilot was faced with the sudden challenge of ditching in complete darkness. You'd have to be Superman to pull that off in the few seconds that you'd have. 10 to 30 seconds later, it crashed in the ocean. One eyewitness, a mechanic, said that the engines sounded fine on taxi and takeoff, but the plane just climbed very, very slowly. Then he heard 3 backfires and an explosion, which he thought was maybe impact with the ocean. Maybe. Parts of the plane were found and the body of pilot Jerry Hill, but no other bodies were ever found. That an engine failed didn't surprise any experts of the time. That engine, the Wright R3350, had been rushed into wartime production way back in the 40s and was notorious for failing. They found all 4 engines on the ocean floor and found that number 3 had a badly damaged crankshaft, which was not clear if that had happened on impact or not. The NTSB reported that the sumps contained pieces from previous engine repairs, whatever that means. Number 2 was fully feathered, so it had failed during this flight, and the pilot had responded to it. 2 was also internally destroyed. The NTSB concluded that with number 2 failing, and the weight and the aircraft could not maintain altitude in a turn, the pilot could not dump fuel fast enough, they think the pilot was unaware of how low he was because he was not in a water landing configuration. Of course, he was really busy. Maybe he just didn't have time. One scenario is that when the pilot discharged the fuel, going back to that whole dumping the fuel possibility, it could have ignited behind the number 2 engine, which then could have caused that explosion just above the surface of the ocean. At the end, the NTSB's probable cause was failure of engine number 2, loss of power on engine number 3, inadequate maintenance and servicing, uncertified personnel on the crew, and inadequate pre-flight preparation and planning on the pilot. This plane crashed because corners were cut. They were cut in maintenance, they were cut in preparation, in pre-flight planning, they were cut in crew, and that's what I'm going to take away. You know, I'm an impatient type of person. I know that there have been many times in my life that I cut corners. More likely to save time, but occasionally save money. Flying airplanes is no place to cut corners. It's the place to be obsessive compulsive, to dot every I, to cross every T. When I had that prop strike in the mud with Lola, I wanted to just put on a new prop and call it good. When the mechanic put the new prop on, he tested it and the shaft was within tolerances. When I called the FAA FSDO to get a ferry permit, I was told I actually didn't need one. Basically, the plane was good to go. It was airworthy. And for a fleeting second, I thought, But just for a second, I ferried the plane to my mechanic who removed and shipped the engine off for inspection, which, by the way, the engine was fine. But it was getting old in its life, so I went ahead and did the overhaul. My pocketbook really wishes I had just cut the corner. But I know, deep down, I did the right thing. I can fly the plane now knowing that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, corners were not cut. And that's having confidence in your airplane. What about you? Do you cut corners? Maybe you cut corners in certain areas of your life. Maybe you cut corners in your flying. Let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear from you what corners you might cut. And I appreciate you watching this accident investigation. Please like, share, subscribe, and remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills. Take care.
Thanks for watching. And, there's a lot to take away from this. And, as we said at the very beginning, as Salvador Perez said, the World Series trophy is number 1, but number 2 is the Roberto Clemente Award. And I think it's really great that Major League Baseball has chosen, this award to be the Roberto Clemente Award. He so embodied reaching out to the community and, making an impact. And, I'm so happy that they named it that. But thank you guys for watching, and thank you to our sponsors, 67 Designs. They make the best camera mounts. I was just talking to somebody this morning about what kind of mounts they need in their plane, but it works in the car, in your boat, 67D.com, Marshall Protective Services, MPSprotects.com, Colton Mortgage, ColtonTakingOff.com, Z-Vision, the brightest landing and taxi lights out there. I've got a video that I'm going to demonstrate Z Vision's incredibly bright lights here pretty quick on the channel. And of course, Flying Eyes, if you go to flyingeyesoptics.com, use our discount code, taking off all caps, one word for 10% off. And Clemens Insurance, if you need insurance, call Jerry, clemensinsurance.net. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time on the Taking Off podcast.